Welcome back. We're discussing the allegations of fraud in Afghanistan's election this past summer and whether or not the United Nations is involved in a cover-up there. I'm joined by Peter Galbraith, the American diplomat, who until last week was the deputy UN envoy in Kabul. He was fired after disagreeing with his superiors at the UN mission there about how to deal with the allegations of fraud. And those allegations include ghost polling stations that produced hundreds of thousands of votes that were never actually cast by voters, an independent election commission that in Afghanistan that is not really independent but supportive of President Hamid Karzai, and a United Nations mission in Afghanistan that withheld material that could have helped the investigations into fraud. Now, before we get back to Ambassador Galbraith, we have the results of the poll we conducted over the break. We asked, how credible do you think the Afghan election was? Well, 9% said credible enough to be acceptable. 28% said the fraud investigation should continue before final results are announced. 52% said the elections were a total sham, and finally 11% said not sure what to make of the allegations. Now, Ambassador, one thing, your differences with Ambassador Kaidi was they began before you actually even went to Afghanistan, when you were declared as the appointee, as the deputy, and he was immediately objecting. To what degree was that that objection because the US was pushing for an American diplomat to take the second top position there in Afghanistan, do you think?
I think he did have concerns about having an American, but of course the United States is the major supporter of the effort in Afghanistan. The Obama administration has put a great emphasis on working with the UN, so it was quite natural that they would want a senior American. I think it's also fair, though, that when I was proposed, Ambassador Ide responded favorably his conversation with Ambassador Holbrooke, because he knows me. We've been friends since 1994. Actually, I'm here in Norway because my wife and children are Norwegian, and I was introduced to her by Kai Ide. So this was a long-standing friendship, and what has happened here has been an ongoing disagreement about policy, which of course I'm sure has done damage to the friendship, but it is a policy disagreement about how to respond to this very serious problem of fraud in the Afghanistan elections.
We've got Jorge on the line from Albania. Good to hear from Albania. What would you like to ask, Jorge?
Hello, great show. Ambassador, thank you for your courage. What are the chances of Karzai winning in a runoff? And does the international community have any reason to fear the results of a runoff?
Okay.
Jorge, first, this is not about who should become president of Afghanistan. It is simply that the next president should be chosen by actual voters and not by fraud. But of course, President Karzai is popular in large parts of the country. I think if there hadn't been fraud, he still would be ahead of Abdullah by a significant margin, and he may well win an honest runoff. But that's not really the issue. The issue here is to simply let the Afghan people have their votes counted, and only votes that were counted by real people.
Well, Ambassador, we had a couple of questions here from viewers who sent us questions on Facebook. The first one from Emmanuel Botelho. I'll put this one to you first. Emmanuel Botelho says, why should we trust the implementation and supervising of democracy to a US-controlled organization like the UN when the US clearly has double standards regarding democracy? And this one that came in from Ninve Albazi, also through Facebook, says, do you believe the UN is one-sided, favoring only what the West wants for Afghanistan? Now, I wonder if these questions reflect how some see the UN's mission as tainted in Afghanistan because of the US influence.
Well, I think it's actually a very strange question to suggest to suggest that it's because of the U.S. that the UN is untrustworthy. After all, I'm spent my career in the U.S. government. I'm a former American ambassador, and I'm the one who's been recalled for what? For wishing to have, for raising the issue of fraud, for wishing the United Nations to do something about fraud. And it was a Norwegian who was the one who pushed so hard for my removal. So I think it's wrong to think of the United Nations as an American-dominated institution. And even if there are Americans like me in the institution, I took an oath to the organization to be a good international civil servant, and I tried very hard to fulfill the mandate that the United Nations gave me, which was to support free, fair, and transparent elections, not fraudulent ones.
Okay, we've got Abdul in the United Kingdom with a question. Abdul, thanks for being with us. What would you like to ask?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the concern Mr. Peter has is quite respectable, but in the meantime, sometimes ordinary Afghans feel that you know, the motives behind his position is very you know, similar to the concerns of Mr. Abdullah. So, what is the key motivation Mr. Peter have behind the transparency, or, you know, like the fraudulent case of election? Could you clarify that, please?
Abdul, yes, I'm happy to clarify that. And I suppose the best way I can do that is to describe what what happened on election day. I went out, I saw people voting, standing in line. I saw women wearing their best clothes, children all dressed up. It was a very important day for Afghans. And in parts of the country, going out to vote was a very dangerous thing. And so I think the people who went out and actually voted were entitled to have their votes honestly counted and not to have the result diluted by the addition of hundreds of thousands or million of fraudulent ballots. And it's as simple as that. It's not about whether Dr. Abdullah becomes president or Hamid Karzai or any third person. It's simply about having an honest election. In advance of the election, I tried to get these ghost polling stations removed from the books. After the election, I tried to have the evidence of fraud presented to the Election Complaints Commission. And at a critical stage, all I did was to ask that the Independent Election Commission stay with its published procedures, which were to exclude obviously fraudulent ballots from the final tally. I don't think those were very radical positions at all.
To what degree, Ambassador, does this? I was going to say, to what degree does this play into the hands of the Taliban, who now can look at what's going on and say that the West is interfering and that it has an agenda that is not necessarily to the benefit of the Afghan people?
Well, these elections were meant to be a milestone on Afghanistan's path to democracy and stability, the second democratic elections in the history of Afghanistan for president. And they turned out to be quite the opposite. Because of the fraud, they've been a source of instability. They risk undermining the credibility of whatever Afghan government emerges. They clearly are diminishing international support in the United States and in Europe for having troops or increasing the number of troops in Afghanistan. So this whole process has turned out to be an enormous victory for the Taliban. And that's exactly why I think that the United Nations and the international community had a right and a responsibility to intervene, first to prevent the fraud and then to take steps to deal with it once it took place. This was not interference in Afghanistan's internal affairs. This was election that the international community paid for and which was just critical to the success of a mission which involves more than 100,000 troops from the United States and its allies.
We've got less than a minute here, actually about 30 seconds for you to answer this question from Facebook from France by Yuna Guillamot from Strasbourg, who says, how do you propose the UN or anyone else put Afghanistan back on the democratic track after so many years of conflict? Is there anyone free enough of corruption and or the influence of other countries to lead Afghanistan towards peace and prosperity? The question is, I guess, can Afghanistan be fixed and how? Just a quick thought.
Well, Afghanistan should be fixed not by the international community, but by the Afghan people. That's exactly what elections are for. They need to make the judgment as to who is honest and who can lead their country. And a fraudulent election doesn't do that.
Ambassador, thank you very much for your thoughts, and thanks for joining us.
Well, Riz, very good to be with you again.
We continue our discussion on Afghanistan this Wednesday, which marks the 8th year since the beginning of the US-led war into that country. On the next show, we speak with Somali President Sheikh Sharif Sheikh Ahmed and ask him about plans to end 18 years of instability in his country. Be sure to tune in for that. From me and the team, see you next time.